History did not begin when they told you. What you were taught has a cutoff date, and it is artificial. Across Turkey, Indonesia, and the ocean floor, verified archaeological sites have been carbon dated thousands of years before history officially begins. Not villages, not camps, engineered stone complexes, planned layouts, precision cuts. The dates don't fit. The tools shouldn't exist. These findings are not erased outright. They are contained reclassified as ritual, buried again after discovery, or locked behind funding freezes and non-disclosure agreements. The evidence remains public but fragmented, harmless when isolated, dangerous when connected. Because if these civilizations are acknowledged, the entire timeline collapses. Agriculture is no longer the beginning. Progress is no longer linear. And modern civilization is no longer unique. This isn't about the past. It's about control of origin. Ignored long enough, the truth stays buried. And the pattern is older than history itself. Modern history rests on a simple assumption. Civilization began after agriculture, after writing, after permanent settlement. Before that, humans were primitive, mobile, and incapable of large-scale engineering. This assumption is not a theory. It is a boundary. And boundaries decide what evidence is allowed to matter. Over the last century, that boundary has been breached repeatedly. Massive stone enclosures dated before farming. Urban grids without pottery. Precision-cut megaliths older than metallurgy. Each discovery appears isolated at first, an anomaly, an outlier, a problem to be solved later. But when examined together, a different picture emerges. Not chaos, a pattern. The same sequence repeats. A discovery is made. Initial excitement follows. Carbon dates return older than expected, sometimes catastrophically older. Peer review slows. Language changes. The site is reframed as ceremonial, symbolic, or natural. Excavation permits are reduced. Funding dries up. The public conversation moves on. No single authority issues a ban. None is needed. The system corrects itself. What binds the 10 civilizations in this dossier is not culture, geography, or belief. It is behavior. Identical suppression mechanisms appear across continents and decades. Delayed digs, academic gatekeeping, redacted surveys, and a quiet removal of findings from textbooks and museum narratives. The terminology is consistent. So is the outcome. This matters now because the tools have changed. LIDAR penetrates jungle canopies that hid cities for millennia. Radiocarbon calibration has tightened. Satellite mapping exposes submerged coastlines from the last ice age. Between 2019 and 2024, multiple sites were redated, reimaged, or quietly reopened under declassification windows most people never noticed. The official story is under pressure. If these early civilizations are acknowledged, history no longer moves in a straight line. It fractures. Knowledge is lost. Rebuilt. Lost again. And modern society becomes a survivor, not a starting point. That possibility is destabilizing. To institutions. To identity. To authority. So this dossier does not ask whether ancient people were capable. The evidence already answers that. The question is why this pattern keeps repeating and who benefits when it does. And the first story is already classified. In 1994, on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt noticed something wrong. The hill had been cataloged for decades as a medieval burial mound. Farmers had struck stone while plowing. Nothing unusual. But Schmidt saw worked edges. Intentional angles. This was not a mound. It was a structure. Beneath the soil sat massive T-shaped pillars. Some weigh more than 15 tons, arranged in precise circular enclosures. The date would come later. The implication was immediate. Then the numbers arrived. And they were impossible. Radiocarbon dating placed Göbekli Tepe at approximately 9,600 BC, over 11,000 years ago. Before agriculture. Before pottery. Before metal tools. Officially, humans at this time were hunter-gatherers. Small bands. Temporary shelters. Yet here was monumental architecture on an industrial scale, coordinated labor, Abstract symbolism. Predatory animals carved in high relief. This was not survival behavior. It was civilization-level planning. The dates don't fit. The sequence breaks. The model fails. The evidence was recorded carefully. Stratigraphy was clear. Multiple labs confirmed the age. The pillars were not crude. They were symmetrical, standardized, and oriented. Some aligned with astronomical events. Others formed repeating geometric patterns across enclosures, suggesting centralized design knowledge. No domestic debris was found. No hearths. No trash pits. That absence became the explanation. Göbekli Tepe was labeled a ritual site. That word changed everything. Once framed as ceremonial, the site no longer threatened the timeline. Ritual implies exception. Pilgrimage. Symbolism without infrastructure. It allowed the broader implications to be deferred indefinitely. Excavation continued, but slowly, painfully slowly. Less than 5% of the site has been uncovered. Geophysical surveys indicate dozens of additional enclosures remain buried. Then came the reburial. Large sections of Göbekli Tepe were deliberately covered again after excavation, officially for preservation. Critics noted the irony. The most disruptive archaeological site in modern history was being returned to the dirt. Schmidt objected privately. Publicly, he complied. Funding depended on it. He missed his daughter's graduation. Klaus Schmidt died in 2014 before publishing his full synthesis. His more radical interpretations suggesting Göbekli Tepe represented a lost social order that preceded agriculture remained fragmented across interviews and notes. After his death, the tone changed. New signage softened the language. Media coverage narrowed. The site became famous but safe. Old, but not too old. Impressive, but not advanced. Important, but contained. Göbekli Tepe now sits on UNESCO brochures and tourist routes, presented as a mystery with no consequences. But mysteries do not require reburial. Threats do, and the threat was never the stones. It was what they implied about us. After 1995, excavation permits slowed, and the oldest city stayed buried. In West Java, Indonesia, Gunung Padang was long dismissed as a natural hill topped with scattered stones. Locals told different stories. So did the geometry. In 1979, surveyors noted terraces aligned with cardinal directions, stacked with columnar basalt placed by hand. The structure climbed the hill in deliberate steps. By the early 2000s, geologists and archaeologists began asking the wrong question. What if the hill wasn't natural at all? The first cores answered too quickly. Drill samples taken deep into the structure revealed multiple construction layers. The upper terraces dated to roughly 3,000 years ago. That was acceptable. Below them, a second layer pushed back to 7,000 BCE. Still difficult, but survivable. Then came the third. Organic material embedded beneath compacted stone returned dates exceeding 20,000 years before present. The core log showed engineered fill, not sediment. Something had been built, then built over, then built again. The scans disagreed. The hill was hollow. The dates kept falling. The data was documented in seismic tomography, ground-penetrating radar, and carbon assays from independent labs. Layered voids appeared beneath the terraces, suggesting chambers. The internal structure showed symmetry inconsistent with natural formation. Most damaging of all, the deepest layer predated the last glacial maximum. That placed construction before rising seas, before stable climates, before accepted civilization of any kind. The reaction was immediate and precise. Funding was paused pending methodological review. Excavation permits were narrowed to surface work only. Public statements reframed Gunung Padang as a complex natural formation with human modification. The phrase appeared everywhere at once. Academic journals declined follow-up papers. Media coverage shifted to controversy rather than data. No one said the dates were wrong. They said they were premature. Then the cores were sealed. In 2014, after brief presidential interest brought international attention, the research team was dissolved. Equipment was removed. Samples were reclassified under national heritage protection, limiting independent testing. The most anomalous section identified in internal documents as Layer 3 was declared unstable and off-limits. Access required permissions that never arrived. No one replied. The chamber stayed closed. The hill went quiet. One junior researcher left academia entirely. Years of fieldwork vanished from his CV, replaced by silence. He now sells construction materials outside Bandung. The structure he helped map remains untouched beneath his feet. Officially, Gunung Padang is unresolved. Unofficially, it is frozen. The implications are too large. A multi-phase megalithic construction spanning tens of thousands of years suggests continuity of knowledge through periods history insists were empty. That is not an error. That is a contradiction. And contradictions demand containment. By 2014, the deepest cores Layer 3 were sealed by order. In 1986, off the southern coast of Japan, a local diver searching for a hammerhead shark found stone where it did not belong. Rising from the seabed near Yonaguni Island was a massive stepped structure, flat terraces, sharp corners, and vertical faces descending into deep water. It looked carved. It looked planned. And it sat 25 meters below sea level, where no civilization was supposed to exist. The ocean hid it well. The angles were wrong. The steps kept going. Marine geologist Masaaki Kimura began systematic surveys soon after. Measurements revealed right angles, parallel edges, and symmetrical platforms extending hundreds of feet. There were straight staircases, rectangular cutouts, what appeared to be roads and retaining walls. Tool marks were photographed along the edges, linear striations inconsistent with erosion alone. If artificial, the structure had to predate the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose and drowned coastlines worldwide. That meant older than 10,000 years. Kimura documented everything. Sonar scans, dive footage, comparative erosion analysis. He noted that surrounding rock formations did not fracture in the same way. The monument's surfaces were too flat, too consistent. Natural processes create curves. Yonaguni was angular, brutally so. The sea level didn't fit. The erosion didn't match. The explanation shifted. The response was swift and uniform. Without a full excavation, Yonaguni was declared a natural sandstone formation. The verdict was issued early and often. Once labeled natural, funding evaporated. No large-scale underwater dig was approved. Surveys were allowed, but only observational. No cutting, no sampling, no disturbance. The conclusion preceded the investigation. Dissent became personal. Kimura was publicly criticized by senior academics and advised to avoid speculative interpretations. Media portrayals framed the site as a fringe curiosity. Television segments paired it with Atlanta's mythology, blurring serious analysis into entertainment. The monument became famous, but unserious. That framing was lethal. He never led another major expedition. A younger diver who assisted with early mapping died years later in a commercial accident, never seeing the work completed. His name does not appear in the official record. The structure he charted remains untouched beneath the waves, eroding centimeter by centimeter, out of reach and out of time. Yonaguni was not buried like Göbekli Tepe. It was drowned and then dismissed. What made it dangerous was not proof, but placement. Submerged architecture forces a recalibration of human timelines tied to sea level change. It implies coastal civilizations erased by rising oceans, leaving almost no trace on land. That possibility opens hundreds of new sites and demands new questions. So the monument remains where it is, unexcavated, unresolved, officially natural. But natural things do not have staircases, and they do not appear the same depth worldwide as other anomalies now quietly logged. At 25 meters deep, Yonaguni joined a growing list of submerged sites. In the Soup Valley of coastal Peru, wind cuts across a dry plain that should not support ruins. For decades, low mounds sat unnoticed, written off as natural hills or later settlements. Then, in the mid-1990s, systematic excavation began. What emerged was not a village. It was a city. Massive platform pyramids, sunken circular plazas, residential zones, administrative spaces, all laid out with intent. Cairo was large. Cairo was organized. Cairo was old. Radiocarbon dating places origins at around 2600 BC, making it older than the pyramids of Egypt and contemporaneous with the earliest Sumerian cities. That alone was disruptive. But Cairo lacked things civilization was supposed to require. There was no pottery, no obvious weapons, no fortifications. Agriculture existed, but writing did not. Yet the city functioned at scale for centuries, supporting tens of thousands of people through coordinated labor and resource management. The model strained, the categories blurred, the labels failed. Evidence came from plant fibers, reed instruments, Quipu-like knot systems, and architectural repetition across the valley. Cairo was not isolated. It was the center of a network of satellite settlements connected by roads and shared design principles. This was not a proto-city. It was a mature urban system operating outside the expected sequence of development. The response was quieter than at other sites and more effective. Cairo was acknowledged, then minimized. It appeared in academic papers, but rarely in textbooks. Public exhibits emphasized its peaceful nature, stripping it of complexity. Media coverage framed it as an oddity, a civilization without war, without writing, without conflict. Safe, contained. Its implications for independent urban emergence were softened until they barely registered. During disputes over site control and interpretation, sections of Cairo were left unprotected. Looting followed. Structures were damaged. Context was lost. Artifacts disappeared into private hands. No emergency intervention arrived. The loss was permanent. One field archaeologist left after months without pay, her notes unpublished. She never returned to academic work. Years of mapping and analysis now sit in boxes, unsighted and unseen. Cairo survived for nearly a millennium. Its record did not. What made Cairo dangerous was not its age alone, but its independence. It demonstrated that complex civilization could arise without the expected triggers, without writing, metallurgy, or warfare. That possibility fractures the idea of a single civilizational pathway. It suggests multiple starts, multiple failures, multiple forgotten peaks. And if civilization can arise anywhere at any time, then history is not a ladder. It is a field of ruins. Cairo remains open to tourists today, sun-bleached and quiet. Its pyramids stand, but its story does not travel far. The silence around it is not enforced by bans or seizures. It is enforced by omission. By 2001, Cairo was dated, mapped, and largely removed from the global narrative. In 2005, near the town of Isoko in Bosnia-Herzegovina, a series of steep, triangular hills drew sudden attention. Satellite imagery suggested symmetry. Ground surveys revealed flat faces aligned to cardinal directions. One hill, Visasika, appeared almost too precise. It rose sharply from the valley floor, its sides meeting at angles rarely produced by erosion alone. The claim followed quickly and detonated. Europe's largest pyramid, older than Egypt, hidden in plain sight. Excavations began amid immediate controversy. Beneath layers of soil, researchers uncovered stone slabs arranged in terraces. Further down, a concrete-like material appeared harder than modern samples, with a binding matrix that resisted drilling. Independent lab tests measured compressive strength, exceeding that of contemporary concrete. Organic material associated with the layers returned dates pushing back more than 10,000 years. The composition didn't fit. The geometry persisted. The backlash escalated. Tunnels near the site revealed dry stack walls, air shafts, and junctions extending for kilometers. Sensors detected unusual electromagnetic readings at the pyramid's apex, signals dismissed by critics but never fully explained. Supporters argued the tunnels predated medieval mining. Detractors insisted they were modern fabrications or misinterpretations. The debate hardened fast, and lines were drawn. Then the tone shifted. Major European archaeological bodies issued statements condemning the project not after comprehensive study, but before. The site was labeled pseudo-archaeology. Universities warned students away. Journals declined submissions. The evidence was no longer debated. It was disqualified. Once framed as fringe, the site became radioactive. One could argue the formations are natural geology shaped by erosion, but this does not account for the engineered binding material or internal tunnel networks. That sentence ended careers. A senior researcher who publicly supported further testing lost his academic affiliation within a year. Grant applications were rejected without review. His field credentials were quietly questioned. He now works outside archaeology, advising on construction projects, his involvement scrubbed from institutional pages. He missed the birth of his second child while at the site. Excavations continued at a reduced scale, funded privately and monitored closely. Every finding was scrutinized for tone rather than accuracy. Language became the battleground. Pyramid was forbidden. Structure was tolerated. Hill was preferred. The words determined whether research survived. What made the Bosnian site uniquely dangerous was not certainty, but visibility. Unlike submerged ruins or remote jungles, this was Europe. Accessible, walkable, impossible to ignore. If it were even partially artificial, it would force a reconsideration of megalithic capability on a continent assumed to be dormant at that depth of time. So the debate was ended without being resolved. The pyramids remain. So does the stigma. Official narratives discourage inquiry without disproving the claims. The question is no longer whether the Bosnian pyramids are real, but why the investigation itself was treated as a threat. After 2006, researchers tied to Visoko found doors quietly closing. In 1968, off the western coast of North Bimini Island in the Bahamas, divers reported a strange formation just beneath the surface. At a depth of less than 6 meters lay a linear arrangement of massive stone blocks stretching for nearly half a mile. The stones were rectangular, flat-topped, and set end to end, forming what looked unmistakably like a road or a harbor wall. It was too straight. The blocks were too uniform. The line kept going. Marine surveys showed the stones resting on a bed of sand, not bedrock. Many blocks exhibited right angles and consistent thickness. Some appeared stacked in two courses, suggesting intentional placement. The alignment paralleled the ancient shoreline as it would have existed at the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were significantly lower. The depth didn't fit. The placement mattered. The questions multiplied. Early analysis documented non-random orientation and spacing. Several stones bore fractures that looked like splitting rather than natural breakage. If the formation was artificial, it implied coastal engineering before 9000 BC at a time when orthodox history allows only scattered foragers. The structure scale suggested planning, labor coordination, and long-term use. The explanation arrived already prepared. Geologists classified the formation as beach rock, naturally cemented limestone broken by wave action and erosion. The label was technically plausible. It was also final. Once applied, it shut down further inquiry. Proposals for excavation or coring were denied. No stones were removed for internal analysis. The road was pronounced solved without being opened. Funding evaporated. Permits stalled. The site went silent. Divers who had documented the formation were gradually excluded from academic discussions. Their footage was archived but rarely cited. Media attention shifted to sensationalism, pairing Bimini with Atlantis speculation. Serious analysis drowned in mythology. That association was enough to end careers. One independent researcher sold his boat to cover costs after institutional support disappeared. He never published his full survey. The data remains on aging tapes in a private collection, unreferenced and unseen. What made Bimini dangerous was simplicity. It did not require advanced technology to understand only acknowledgement that early humans may have built along coastlines now underwater. Accept that, and hundreds of submerged shelves worldwide demand investigation. Entire chapters of human settlement would move offshore. That was not permitted. So the road remains where it is. Shallow, visible, officially natural. Tourists swim over without context, unaware they are crossing a line history refuses to step across. By 1978, Bimini was declared beach rock, and excavation ceased entirely. In the early 1990s, in the remote Ural Mountains of Russia, prospectors searching for gold uncovered stone objects that did not belong in the soil. They were massive, rectangular blocks embedded in sediment, layers dated to deep prehistory. Some weighed several tons. Others were small enough to lift, but no less disturbing. Their surfaces were smooth. Their edges were sharp. And their composition was wrong. They weren't rubble. They weren't natural. They weren't supposed to exist. Laboratory analysis identified unusually pure quartz content far higher than found in local geology. Several blocks exhibited precision angles and flat faces inconsistent with fracturing or glacial transport. Microscopic examination revealed striations resembling machining marks, not crude shaping, controlled abrasion, at scales approaching millimeters. Quartz is not decorative. It is functional. It is technological. Quartz has piezoelectric properties. Under pressure, it generates electrical charge. In modern engineering, it is used for frequency control, oscillators, and timing devices. The implication was not that the Urals housed ancient computers, but that the material choice was deliberate. Someone understood its properties well enough to extract, shape, and deploy it. The samples were documented, photographed, logged. Then something changed. Regional authorities intervened, citing national security concerns. The site was placed under restricted access. Military personnel appeared. Several blocks were removed without public inventory. Requests for follow-up study were denied. The explanation offered was vague, unauthorized excavation in a sensitive zone. The classification level jumped. The trail went cold. The stones vanished. Independent researchers attempting to revisit the area were turned away. Journal submissions describing the findings stalled indefinitely. One paper, already accepted pending revision, was withdrawn without explanation. The editors stopped responding. The term megalith disappeared from official descriptions, replaced by geological anomalies. One geologist who had handled the samples lost access to his laboratory within months. His contract was not renewed. He later stated, off record, that the material should not be possible for its depth and context. On record, he declined all comment. He never returned to fieldwork. What made the Ural megaliths uniquely dangerous was not their age alone, but their precision. Stone tools can explain rough shaping. They do not explain uniform quartz blocks with consistent geometry buried beneath ancient strata. If authentic, the find suggests a level of material science far outside the accepted capabilities of Paleolithic societies. And material science leaves traces that cannot be mythologized away. Unlike pyramids or roads, these objects were portable, testable, repeatable. That made them liabilities. They could be measured by anyone with the right instruments. They could not be reframed as ritual or coincidence. So they were removed. Today, references to Ural megaliths survive only in scatter reports and archive photographs. No official collection acknowledges their existence. No museum displays them. They sit somewhere else now classified, mislabeled, or dismantled. Not lost to time. Lost to custody. After the seizure, no additional samples from the Urals entered public record. For centuries, the Amazon was described as untouched wilderness. Too poor, too hostile, incapable of supporting complex society. That claim collapsed in silence when LIDAR scans began peeling back the canopy. Beneath the trees were cities. Not villages, not camps, urban systems. Beginning in the early 2000s and accelerating after 2015, aerial surveys revealed vast networks of geoglyphs, roads, moats, canals, and plazas stretching across thousands of square kilometers in Brazil and Bolivia. Perfect squares, circles, causeways aligned to solstices. Population estimates surged from thousands to over 1 million inhabitants in some regions. This was not marginal occupation. It was engineered landscape management on a continental scale. The jungle wasn't empty. It was curated, and it was old. Radiocarbon dates from ditches, embankments, and habitation layers pushed construction back well before European contact some 2000 BCE and earlier. Soil analysis revealed terra preta, artificially enriched earth capable of sustaining agriculture indefinitely. Forest composition showed intentional planting. The natural Amazon was, in places, a design system. Then the subsurface scans arrived. Ground-penetrating radar and core samples beneath several major geoglyph sites identified deep construction layers compacted fill beneath later works. One internal report flagged a familiar term, Layer 3 anomaly, the same phrase used years earlier at Gunung Padang. Dense, organized material. Too deep, too early, not supposed to be there. The breadcrumb resurfaced. The depth matched. The pattern locked. The response was not academic debate. It was administrative action. Protection zones were delayed. Development permits advanced faster than heritage listings. Deforestation accelerated directly over map sites. By the time follow-up surveys were approved, portions of the geoglyphs were gone flattened for cattle ranching and roads. Data existed. Maps existed. Intervention did not. Funding shifted to surface documentation only. Subsurface work was deemed unnecessary. One indigenous community was displaced after land was rezoned for agriculture. Their elders had warned researchers about old ground beneath the old ground. The warning went unrecorded. The community relocated. The site was bulldozed. She never returned to the river. What made the Amazon cities intolerable was scale. One lost site can be dismissed. Hundreds cannot. The evidence showed that dense populations thrive sustainably in environments assumed impossible. Worse, it suggested continuity knowledge passed down through collapses, rebuilds layered atop older foundations. Layer 3 was not a fluke. It was a signature. At this point, coincidence fails. The same deconstruction, layers appear across continents. The same reframing follows. Ritual, natural, inconclusive, then delay, then loss. The Amazon was not suppressed by classification or seizure. It was erased by speed. The cities are still there in fragments, enough to prove the claim, not enough to force the rewrite, and that balance appears deliberate. By 2020, over 20 mapped geoglyph sites were destroyed or degraded off the coast of Gujarat, India. The sea hides a city that refuses to stay mythical. Ancient texts described Dwarka as a fortified port, built by Krishna and lost in the ocean after his death. For decades, this was treated as allegory. Then sonar hit stone. In the late 1990s, marine archaeologists surveying the Gulf of Kumbat detected rectilinear features beneath the waves' walls, platforms, and what appeared to be streets. Subsequent dives recovered anchors, pottery fragments, and work blocks at depths corresponding to coastlines submerged at the end of the last ice age. The myth touched data. The lines were straight. The city had edges. Radiocarbon dating of recovered materials returned ages ranging from 3000 BCE to far earlier, with some samples suggesting occupation before 9000 BCE. Stone anchors matched designs from early seafaring cultures. The layout showed planned harbor works, not random collapse. Dwarka was not a scattered debris. It was organized. Then came the deeper scans. Sub-bottom profiling revealed structural layers beneath the visible ruins, foundations below foundations. The internal documentation used a phrase already seen before. Layer 3 anomaly. Same wording. Same implication. Dense construction beneath later occupation, now submerged. The depth corresponded precisely to global sea level rise curves. Same depth, same layering, same problem. The findings cross a line. Official statements emphasize caution. Excavation was slowed, then paused. Permits for further deep water work were deferred, pending review. International collaboration offers went unanswered. The data was not refuted. It was stalled. One lead diver suffered a severe decompression injury during an extended survey. He never returned to the water. His footage remains archived but unreleased, cited in reports without being shown publicly. He walks with a limp now. The narrative shifted subtly. Dwarka became multi-period. Later settlements were emphasized. Earlier layers were labeled inconclusive. The oldest dates were described as contamination or redeposited material. Each explanation was plausible. Together, they formed a wall. What made Dwarka explosive was convergence. It linked textual tradition with physical evidence, myth with measurable architecture. More importantly, it confirmed a global pattern. Coastal cities lost to rising seas, rebuilt on top of older foundations, their deepest layers consistently out of bounds. Layer 3 was no longer isolated. It was global. This was the climax point. The pattern no longer asked for permission. The same depths, the same delays, the same administrative language, different countries, same outcome. The implications were now unavoidable. So the work stopped. Dwarka remains underwater, partially mapped, carefully discussed, and permanently unfinished. It sits at the intersection of belief and data too real to ignore, too disruptive to finish. And it is not alone. By 2005, deep excavation at Dwarka was indefinitely postponed. By the time the 10th site is examined, denial is no longer a position. It is a strategy. These civilizations were separated by oceans, climates, and cultures, yet they encounter the same response once they cross an invisible line. Too old, too advanced, too complete. The pattern is not architectural. It is administrative. The discoveries followed a sequence. The resistance followed another. Both were consistent. First came reframing. Structures became ritual. Cities became anomalies. Engineering became coincidence. When that failed, access narrowed. Permits delayed. Funding paused. Language softened. If evidence persisted, it was buried literally or procedurally. Excavation slowed until time or development erased what remained. No single authority needed to intervene. The system functioned as designed. Then the documents surfaced. In 2013, a leaked internal memo circulated briefly among heritage professionals before disappearing from public view. The header carried a familiar seal. The content was procedural, not conspiratorial. It advised caution when sites challenged established chronological frameworks, recommending deferral of deep excavation and prioritization conservation over interpretation. The timestamp mattered. It aligned with multiple shutdowns across different continents. The memo was never acknowledged. The language was repeated. The outcome matched. What these 10 sites share is not proof of a lost global empire. That claim is easy to attack. What they share is something more dangerous, evidence that human civilization is older, cyclical, and more fragile than the linear story allows. Knowledge rises. Knowledge collapses. Remains are buried. Survivors start again. That idea destabilizes authority. It undermines progress narratives. It suggests we are not the first to reach this point and not guaranteed to keep it. One collective loss runs through every case. Context. Generations of human effort reduced to footnotes or tourist attractions, their deeper layers sealed or destroyed before they could speak. Not erased by time, erased by policy. And now the hinge. The final reveal is not a new site or artifact. It is recognition. Once the pattern is seen, it cannot be unseen. The same depths, the same delays, the same words. From Turkey to Indonesia to the Amazon to India, the record shows coordinated restraint, not coincidence. What was buried was not stone. It was precedent. If acknowledged, it would force a rewrite not just of history, but of expectation of how often civilization fails, and how easily its traces are lost. The question is no longer whether these civilizations existed. It is why we are discouraged from connecting them. The evidence survived. The narrative did not. What if history is not a record of what happened, but a filter of what was allowed to remain? Across these 10 cases, no single discovery proves a lost golden age. That is not the claim. The record is messier than myth and colder than fantasy. What it shows instead is repetition. Civilizations rising earlier than expected, organizing at scale, then collapsing hard enough to leave only fragments. Those fragments resurface centuries later and are managed, delayed, softened, or lost again. This raises an uncomfortable question. If human history is cyclical, not linear, what does that say about permanence? About progress? About us? One could argue there is a simpler explanation, that these sites are unrelated anomalies, that dating methods fail, that nature mimics design, that enthusiasm outran evidence, that no suppression exists, only caution. This is a reasonable position. Skepticism is necessary, but skepticism must apply evenly. When the same cautions appear at the same depth, with the same language, producing the same outcome, across continents, coincidence stops being parsimonious. The records say otherwise. What is at stake is not academic pride or alternative timelines. It is something closer home. If civilization has collapsed before repeatedly, then resilience matters more than superiority. Memory matters more than monuments. And forgetting becomes the most dangerous failure of all. Because if earlier societies lost knowledge we are only now rediscovering, then our advantage is temporary, and our future is conditional. These stories are not about ancient people. They are about modern vulnerability. The evidence exists. It is incomplete, damaged, and contested, but exists. What happens next depends on whether it is connected or ignored. So this leaves a choice. Archive it or burn it.